Hi there, I'm Alex, 22 years old, living in a peaceful small town where not much happens. I have a part-time job at the local hardware store and spend the rest of my time assisting my mom with household tasks. Life here is simple and quiet, sometimes even too quiet. That was until yesterday. I recall walking onto the front porch, stretching after a long shift, when I noticed black cars lined up along the street. People in formal attire moved slowly, speaking in low voices. I instantly understood what it meant. Someone had passed away. Initially, I assumed it was one of the older residents who had lived here forever. But then I saw her, Olivia, standing by the large oak tree in her front yard, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if holding herself together. My heart sank. Olivia had always stood out. She wasn't like the other women in the neighborhood. She was elegant, reserved, and beautiful in an understated way that commanded attention without seeking it. I'd seen her around, exchanged smiles a couple of times, but we never really talked. Her husband, an older man, always busy in the garage, was more memorable to me. And now, he was gone. The day dragged on. People came and went, offering condolences, bringing casseroles, flowers, and empty words. I kept my distance, unsure of what to say to a woman who had just lost her husband. What could a 22-year-old like me offer? As evening fell and the neighborhood lights came on, I found myself restless, pacing in my living room. I looked out the window and saw her sitting alone on her porch steps, staring into nothingness, not crying, not moving. I told myself to stay out of it. But before I knew it, I was walking across the yard, heart pounding. As I approached, I stopped, suddenly uncertain. What was I doing? I cleared my throat softly, but she didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly, her eyes glassy, red, and so empty it was painful to look at. I sat down next to her without a word. We stayed like that for a while, in a heavy, almost sacred silence. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. Suddenly she reached out, her cold, trembling hand brushing against mine. I froze, not out of fear, but because I sensed this wasn't just grief. It was a deeper human need, a desire not to feel utterly alone. Her fingers gently wrapped around my hand, fragile and desperate. Then she whispered so softly I almost missed it. I miss being touched. I didn't respond. I just turned my palm up and let her hold on to me. Her hand fit into mine like a broken piece searching for completion. We sat there under the dim porch light, two broken people in a world that kept spinning as if nothing had changed. But for us, everything had. The next morning I woke up early, even though it was my day off. Sleep hadn't come easily after the previous night. I kept feeling the touch of her hand, the weight of her loneliness. Around 10, I was on the porch with a cup of cheap coffee when I saw her again. Olivia stood by her mailbox, wearing an oversized sweater and jeans, her hair tied up messily, looking like she hadn't slept either. She glanced over, and I gave a small, awkward wave. She hesitated, then crossed the street toward me. My heart raced again. "Hey," she said softly as she approached. "Hey," I replied, standing up like a nervous schoolboy. There was an uncomfortable pause. Then, to my surprise, she smiled, a tired, broken smile, and asked, "Would you like to come in for some coffee? I could use the company." I didn't hesitate. We walked across the street together. The house felt different now, empty and quiet. Unlike the day before, when it was full of mourners. Every step echoed, Inside, it smelled faintly of aftershave, old wood, and something floral. Maybe the scent of the funeral flowers still wilting on the kitchen counter. She moved silently, making coffee like a ghost going through the motions. I stood awkwardly by the doorway, noticing the details. A picture frame face, down on a side table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey next to a glass, a crumpled tissue on the armrest of the couch. The weight of grief hung heavy in the air. She handed me a mug, and we sat down across from each other at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke at first, just sipping our coffee, like strangers trying to fill the silence. Finally, she broke it. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she said quietly, staring into her cup. "There's nothing to be sorry for," I answered immediately. She looked up at me, and I saw it. The vulnerability, the confusion, the aching loneliness she was trying to hide. "My husband and I, we weren't good. Not for a long time," she began, then paused. "He cheated," she continued, her voice hollow. "More than once. I found out 3 years ago. After that, it was like we were just pretending, staying together because it was easier than tearing everything apart." She laughed bitterly. "Isn't that pathetic? Staying in a marriage just to avoid the mess of ending it?" I shook my head. "It's not pathetic, it's human." Her eyes softened a little. "And now," she whispered, "he's gone. And I feel like I don't even know what I'm supposed to be grieving for. The man he was, the life we pretended to have, or just the fact that now I'm really alone." My throat tightened. "I get it," I said after a long moment. "Not exactly, but my dad left when I was a kid. Never looked back. My mum raised me alone. For a long time, I thought there was something wrong with me. Like maybe if I'd been better, he would have stayed." Her gaze locked onto mine, intense and searching. "I guess we're both a little broken, huh?" she said with a half smile. "Maybe," I said. "But broken doesn't mean ruined." For a moment, the air between us shifted. Not romantic, not yet, just two wounded souls finding common ground. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against mine again. So light, it was almost a question. I didn't pull away. She exhaled slowly, like she had been holding her breath for hours, maybe days. "Thank you," she whispered. We sat like that for a long time, hands barely touching, coffee forgotten, the morning sun creeping across the floorboards. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not happiness, not even hope, but maybe the tiniest spark of life. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Neither of us said goodbye. As I stepped off her porch, I glanced back once. She was still standing there watching me, her arms wrapped around herself. And for the first time, I realized maybe I wasn't just helping her heal. Maybe she was helping me too. Over the next couple of days, I thought about her more than I should have. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her sitting there. The sadness in her face, the way her hand had barely touched mine, like she was afraid she'd forget how it felt. It wasn't like I planned to fall for her. It just happened. And the worst part was, I didn't even know if it was wrong. One afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. I told myself I wasn't planning to go past her house. It just happened to be on the way. As I walked by, I saw her in the driveway, standing over a few cardboard boxes. She looked smaller, more fragile, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, her hair tied back lazily. When she spotted me, she gave a small wave. the kind that said she could use some help, but was too tired to ask. Without thinking, I crossed the street. "Hey," I said as I got closer. "Hey," she echoed, forcing a little smile. "I'm just trying to clean out some of his stuff. I thought it would make me feel better, but..." She trailed off and shrugged. "Need a hand?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. We worked side by side for a while, mostly in silence, packing up old tools, throwing away broken junk, taping up boxes labeled "Donate." I could feel her struggling emotionally every time she picked up something that had once belonged to him. She was fighting a war inside her chest, and I didn't know how to help. Inside the garage, she found a dusty old photo album. She opened it slowly, flipping through the pages. There were pictures of her and him smiling on vacations, at family dinners, birthdays. Her hands trembled. "I don't even recognize us anymore," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, breathing with her, being there. She sat down on the edge of an old workbench, the album slipping from her hands onto her lap. "I stayed because I thought it would get better," she whispered. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that he'd come back to me, but he never did. He stopped loving me a long time ago, and I just faded into the background. The raw honesty in her voice cut deeper than any scream. I crouched down in front of her, looking up into those tired, beautiful eyes. "You didn't fade," I said quietly. "You just needed someone to notice you again." She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears, but it was useless. Then, before I could stop myself, I reached out and gently wiped the tear from her cheek with the back of my hand. She froze at my touch. For a moment, I thought I had overstepped, that she would pull away and ask me to leave. But instead, she leaned into my hand. Neither of us moved. The world around us faded away, leaving only that moment. The scent of dust, old wood, and her shampoo filled the air. The feel of her skin against mine. The sound of her shaky breath. It all blended into a single, intense experience. Slowly, almost cautiously, she raised her hand and placed it over mine. I felt it then, that pull, that electric spark that made my heart race. Without thinking, I leaned in closer. Our lips met softly, uncertainly, almost like a question. The kiss wasn't passionate or wild. It was gentle, fragile, like something sacred we both feared breaking. When we finally pulled apart, she kept her forehead pressed against mine. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "For needing this? You don't have to be sorry," I said softly. "Not with me." But she shook her head, pulling back, her hands falling away from mine. "I can't," she said, her voice trembling. "It's too soon. I'm not ready." I nodded, even though every part of me wanted to pull her back into my arms. She stood up quickly, brushing imaginary dust off her jeans. "Thank you for helping," she said, her tone formal, as if she were building a wall between us. "I think I need to be alone for a bit." I respected her wish and left, my heart heavy, my lips still tingling from her kiss, my mind racing. As I walked home, the weight of it all settled over me. I didn't know what we were, or if I had made things worse. All I knew was that when she kissed me, even for those few precious seconds, it felt right. And I wasn't sure I could ever go back to pretending I didn't want more. The next few days were agonizing. I didn't see her, not even once. The curtains in her house stayed drawn, no lights on at night, no sound of footsteps on the porch. It was like she had vanished. I tried to keep busy, helping my mum around the house, picking up extra shifts at the hardware store, even going for long drives with no destination, but nothing helped. I couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way her hand had trembled against mine, about the kiss. Soft, broken, full of everything she didn't know how to say. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, asking myself if I had pushed too far. Maybe she regretted it. Maybe she hated me for it. On the fourth day, it rained heavily, the kind of storm that made the streets flood, and the sky stayed dark all day. It matched my mood perfectly. Around 7 that evening, I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, when I heard a soft knock at the door. At first, I thought I had imagined it, but then another knock came. I opened the door, and there she was, Olivia, soaked to the bone, her hair sticking to her face, wearing a loose hoodie and jeans, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. For a second, we just stared at each other. She looked like she was about to shatter. Without thinking, I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked past me, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, and stood in the middle of the living room like she didn't know what to do next. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice raw. I didn't know where else to go. "You don't have to apologize," I said softly, closing the door behind her. She turned to face me then, and I saw it. All the emotions she had been trying to bury these past few days. Grief, guilt, loneliness, and something else. Something fragile and desperate. "I thought I could do this alone," she whispered. "I thought I had to, but the house is so empty. It's like the walls are closing in on me. And I keep telling myself I'm supposed to be strong. I'm supposed to grieve the right way. But I don't even know what that means anymore." Her voice cracked, and before I could stop myself, I crossed the room and pulled her into my arms. She didn't resist. She buried her face in my chest, her fingers clutching the fabric of my shirt like a lifeline. We stood there for a long time, the rain pounding against the windows, the world outside disappearing. Eventually, she pulled back just enough to look up at me. "I'm scared," she said. "Of what?" I asked. "Of forgetting him," she whispered. "Of betraying him. Of betraying myself." "You're not betraying anyone," I said firmly. "You're allowed to move on. You're allowed to live." Tears welled up in her eyes. "You make me feel alive," she said almost accusingly, like it was my fault. "You deserve to feel alive," I said. Her lower lip trembled. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I," admitted. And it was the truth. I wasn't some wise old man who had all the answers. She told me about the slow unraveling, the distance, the lies, the nights spent pretending not to hear whispered phone calls in the other room. She told me about the loneliness that had crept in, how it had built walls around her heart until she barely recognized herself. "I stayed because it was easier," she said, her voice hollow. "Because admitting it was over felt like admitting I had failed." "You didn't fail," I said. "You loved. You gave everything you had. That's not failure." She looked at me like she wanted to believe me, like she needed to believe me. And in that moment, something shifted between us. This wasn't about filling a void. This wasn't about loneliness or desperation. This was two people battered by life, finding something pure and real in the wreckage. "I don't want to be a ghost," she said softly. "I don't want to just exist." "Then don't," I said. "Live, love, breathe. You deserve all of it." She reached for my hand, not hesitantly this time, but with purpose, her fingers intertwined with mine, warm and sure. We sat like that, the storm raging outside, while inside something new and fragile and beautiful was taking root. Neither of us said the words. We didn't have to. It was there in the way she leaned into me without fear, in the way I held her like she was something precious. It was messy. It was complicated. It was terrifying. But it was real. And for the first time, I knew this wasn't just about helping her heal. It was about building something new together. It's strange how quickly life can change. One moment, you're standing in the wreckage of everything you thought you knew. And the next, you're planting new roots in the ashes. That's what it felt like with Olivia. Over the next few weeks, we didn't rush anything. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic promises, just small, steady steps. Each day a little closer, each moment a little stronger. She started letting more light into the house, opening the curtains, throwing out old furniture that held too many memories, painting the walls fresh colors, soft blues and greens that made the place feel alive again. I was there for all of it. Sometimes helping her haul boxes, sometimes just sitting quietly with her while she figured things out, sometimes making her laugh without even trying. The neighbors talked, of course. It's a small town. People notice things. They noticed me coming and going from her house. They noticed the way she smiled differently when I was around. But we didn't care. We weren't living for them. We were living for us. One afternoon, we were sitting on the back porch sipping sweet tea, watching the sun dip low behind the trees. She was wearing a loose sundress, her bare feet propped up on the railing, looking more at peace than I had ever seen her. I couldn't stop looking at her. The way the fading sunlight caught in her hair, the soft lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, the way she laughed without holding back now. She caught me staring and laughed. "What? Nothing?" I said, smiling. "You're just different. Happier?" She looked down at her hands for a moment. Thoughtful. "I am," she said softly. "For the first time in a long time. I'm not surviving. I'm living." I reached over and took her hand, feeling her fingers lace through mine easily, naturally. "I'm glad," I said. She squeezed my hand gently. "You saved me, Alex," she whispered. I shook my head. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." We sat there for a while longer, just breathing in the warm evening air, listening to the crickets starting up their song. At some point, she turned to me, her eyes serious. "I don't want to hide this," she said. "Hide what?" I asked. "You. Us." My heart skipped a beat. "I don't either," I said. She smiled then. A real smile full of light and hope, and maybe even a little mischief. "Good," she said, "because I want everyone to know how lucky I am." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. The next day, we started making real plans. She decided to sell the house. It held too many ghosts, too many rooms filled with memories she no longer wanted to live with. We found a small place on the edge of town, a fixer-upper, with a big backyard and a wide porch, where we could drink coffee in the mornings and watch the stars at night. It wasn't perfect. The floors creaked, the paint peeled, the pipes needed work. But it was ours. Together, we built something new. We painted the walls ourselves, getting more paint on each other than on the actual surfaces. We planted a garden, or at least tried to, and laughed when half the plants died, because neither of us had a clue what we were doing. We argued about stupid things like what color to paint the front door, or whether we should get a cat or a dog. And through it all, we loved each other. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and real and sometimes hard, but it was ours. A few months later, she introduced me to her family. Her sister, her mother, her two nephews, who immediately decided I was the coolest person alive because I knew how to make a soccer ball spin on my finger. It wasn't always easy. Some people judged. Some whispered behind our backs about the age difference, about the circumstances. But we didn't care, because when I looked at Olivia, I didn't see the woman who had lost everything. I saw the woman who had found the courage to live again. And when she looked at me, she didn't see some kid from across the street. She saw the man who had stood beside her when the world felt like it was ending. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching another sunset bleed across the sky, she rested her head on my shoulder and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I never could." And I meant it, because sometimes life doesn't go the way you planned. Sometimes it breaks you. Sometimes it burns everything to the ground. But if you're lucky, if you're brave enough to keep your heart open, you find something beautiful rising from the ashes. We did. And it was more real, more powerful, and more perfect than anything either of us had ever dared to imagine.